this evening for a couple months now. If there's anything I love better than almost anything, it's talking about ham radio. I guess the only other thing I like better is actually operating, being on the air. But first of all, a brief little introduction. I'm Dave Perry, N4QS. I first got my license in 1967. I was 13. So I've been a ham now for 48 years. And there's just something about it. The first time I heard a signal on the radio, Morse code signal, I got a bug, and I've just been intrigued by that unusual, what do you want to call it, phenomena of sending electromagnetic waves through the ionosphere. It's just something that has intrigued me now for almost 48 years. Anyway, I want to talk about a little trip I did around the world. Now, who was the first to circumnavigate the globe?
Viking.
Magellan?
Marco Polo.
No, Magellan was first, and actually he wasn't first because he got killed in the Philippines. So it was his crew that was the first to go around the globe, and of course it took them 3 years. And then of course we've all heard about the famous novel by Jules Verne, Around the World in 80 Days. That was a fictitious account of Phineas Fogg, who went around the world in a hot air balloon. And it took him 80 days. More recently, though, who was the first astronaut to go around the world? John Glenn. In fact, he went around 7 times, I think. Is that right? Was he the first to go around, or was it Russian?
There was a Russian that did.
Well, yeah, you're right.
Yuri
You're right.
Gagarin.
I don't, yeah, that's right.
I don't think he took too often though. Yeah.
So anyway, John Glenn did it in like 2 hours. Well, tonight I want to tell you about my trip around the world that actually took me 18 days. And the way it got started, I've been saving this picture for you guys.
Do we need the lights be shut off? Everybody see that okay?
Maybe we can dim them a little bit or turn them off. Last April, I received an invitation to join the VooDoo Contest Group. And at the time, they really didn't even know where they were going. But this is a group of about 20 to 25 hands who have been going to strange and exotic places every year for the CQ Worldwide Contest, CW Contest. We'll get into a little bit for those that aren't too familiar about contests here in a little second, and how they work and what's so neat about them. But the CQ Worldwide is the largest, highest participation contest in the world. And it happens every year. There's a sideband version in October and the CW in November. Well, they asked me to go with them for the first time, so I became an official VooDoo.
So is that you?
Yeah, that's actually our leader. And, but they, in the past, had gone to Africa almost every year. And they've been a little bit afraid of going back to West Africa lately, so they decided to branch out. And it was this year that we were invited to go to Kuwait. So I'll tell you a little more about that in a second. But once I heard we were going to Kuwait, that's when I decided, well, why Kuwait? They had looked and searched for, a place that maybe even a station that was already there, a contest station that was already put together. In the past, they would go to West Africa and they would spend a week putting up all these antennas in some beat-up hotel, some little city, and it was really kind of an arduous, activity. Well, this year they decided they wanted to go to Asia. So, and the reason was they thought that they could possibly break the all-time Asian record in the CQ Worldwide. And I'll explain that here in a little bit. But they liked it because of the proximity to Europe, might have some good openings to North America, and we'll get into that a little bit. But the real reason was they had heard about this contest station, 9K2HN, and so the head of the VooDoos contacted Hammond last May and asked if he would be interested in hosting about 10 guys 5 from the US and 5 from Britain, and Ham had just jumped at the idea. And you're gonna see here in a minute that he was just a great host. We really had a great time. Now, since I knew I was going halfway around the world to Kuwait, I always had this dream of flying around the world. So I said, why not just keep going? So I got busy and I made airline reservations to go completely around the world in 18 days. And it all started the third weekend in November. I left Chicago at 8 o'clock in the evening on a Wednesday. I was in London by 10 a.m., had a 2-hour layover, had a little breakfast there, and then caught a direct flight from London to Dubai. And I decided that since I was going to be in Kuwait, I also wanted to see Dubai because I had heard so much about it. And I was really impressed. So before I knew it only took, I was in Dubai by midnight on Thursday. Just 2 direct flights, kind of long, but I was there. And when I got there, I was just amazed. As you can see, I want to get out of the way so some of you guys can see, but Dubai is part of the United Arab Emirates, and it's right in here along this place. Of course, Kuwait is up here. So I flew directly in. One of the interesting things, we kind of had to fly a little bit around the ISIS area, so I think we did a little detour. We kind of went this way and then had to skirt Iran because we didn't want to be this far on the west side of Iraq. So we had to kind of scoot in like that to get all the way down to Dubai. So the flight took a little longer than normal, but we made it through no problem. And you can see the United Arab Emirates is really made up of 2 major cities, Dubai and Abu Dhabi. They're really separate principalities. So there's a prince that heads up Dubai, and there's one that heads up Abu Dhabi. And then, of course, you have these other Arab countries up here, Qatar, Bahrain is right there, Oman, and Kuwait. They're all right along the Persian Gulf. What's neat, if you look at where Dubai is, how close I was to Iran. Very, very close. That's Dubai. It's just amazing. This is just a small part of Dubai. There are like 5 or 6 areas like this in Dubai. Everywhere you look, there are skyscrapers just shooting up out of the sky. They built the tallest building in the world. Of course, you've heard about that one that caught on fire, which I think was in this area somewhere, in the marina area, just a week or 2 ago. Unbelievable. It is one of the most modern countries I've ever seen. It is just booming, out of the desert, and it really is quite fascinating. A lot of Europeans go there for holidays. It's a financial center for the entire Middle East. It's a exporting center. They have this huge, what do you want to call it, port, and I was just amazed. It is really one of the big future cities of the world. I think the only thing that can endanger it is the unrest in other parts of the Middle East. When I was there, the weekend I showed up, they had the PGA, the European PGA Championship on one of the golf courses. I just took a cab over. I actually went to the golf tournament 2 days. I got to see Rory McIlroy. This is a guy named Waddle. I didn't know him, but there were Ernie Els, Sergio Garcia, Justin Rose, all these big name guys, and it was a real fun experience. And this is what you typically saw all around the golf course, were these skyscrapers just ringing the golf course everywhere you look. It was really fascinating. This was my host. Fred, age 65 BD, is actually from Britain. That's his wife, and he's just recently married, and he was part of the VooDoo group. And when he heard I was coming to Dubai, he said, Dave, just stop in, stay with me a few nights, then we'll fly to Kuwait together. Well, it turned out he had a problem with his job. He couldn't get off. And he said, since decided to move back to Britain. So I got to stay with him 3-4 nights, and I got to operate a little bit. he got me a license, and I was A6/N4QS. And you see, I made about 700 contacts. You know, I was actually at a golf tournament. I'd come back at night, I was tired. I'd get on for a couple hours. And there was a Czechoslovakian CW contest going on. So I got on that a little bit, 2-3 hours. But I have to admit, I really wasn't operating too much, but it was still fun. You can see the bands that I worked, you know, 10 is the orange. I think, no, that's 30 meters or 30 megahertz. No. 18 megahertz, 10 meters. That's the 14 megahertz band. There's 17 and there's 15. I got to think, boy, I'm talking megahertz or meters here. But it was fun. And you can see I mostly worked, if you know your zones, these are European zones, but I did make some contacts with zone 5 and 4 and even 3, which are North America. And I worked, Ed, did I work anybody else in here? I don't remember. Okay. So I spent about 3 or 4 nights there, and then on Monday, I flew from Dubai to Kuwait. And you can see again what I did. I flew from, and we kind of skirted, I think, Iran and flew right in there. And I was met at the airport by our 2 hosts. This is Hamad, or Hamid, he goes, it's really Hamid, 9K2HN, and his good friend, 9K2QA, Ahmed. And he was there all the time as well, helping us out. And they were just super hosts. Number one, they're very pro-US. And they just love Americans because of what we did in helping free them from Iraq and Saddam Hussein, 20 years ago. But they met me at the airport, and they drove me up to Hamid's farm, which is in the far northern border of Kuwait. It was a mile from Iraq. I'll show you here on the map here. And that's where I joined the other team members. This shows you again where I flew in. I think that's the airport right in there. They picked me up. Hamad's house in the city, I'll show a picture in a second, is right here. But we took this road. It was about a 50-mile drive through the desert, all the way up here to his farm, which is in the Adali farming area. There's actually some rivers through here, and there's some irrigation, and they're growing all sorts of things, in here. This is all desert in here. And you can see how close we are to Saudi Arabia. In fact, when we got to this sign right here, remember, it was a big sign, Saudi Arabia. I thought that'd be so cool. Take a left and just keep driving and go to see how far you can get into Saudi Arabia. But I didn't get to do that. This is Hamid's home in the city, in Kuwait City. And believe it or not, this is the way all the homes look in Dubai as well. They're all like made out of marble and stone, and I guess they don't have a lot of wood over there, but they're very impressive structures. And of course, because of the oil money, there's just a lot of big homes over there. This is his antenna farm in the city. This is just his antennas at home. Big old, I think he even has a 40-meter beam, a 2-element or something. I don't know what else he has here. This is the drive up to the Abdali farms, and this is where you would see, quite a bit was, God bless U.S. troops. You really saw it everywhere you went in Kuwait. They just love Americans. When they hear you're from America, they're just so happy to see you. And that's much different than I think our perceptions of what we hear on CNN, Fox News. You have this feeling that everybody doesn't like America. No way. You take Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, even Egypt, they're very pro-American. They realize they need us to help keep, provide the stability that they really want. And virtually everybody I met in the Middle East, they're middle class just like us. They have jobs, they have nice homes, and they just want that stability, just like we do. They do not want, ISIS is a little tiny fringe element of their society. That's what we don't understand. You know, even Turkey, very pro-US. So there's only a couple areas that are causing all the problems. Camping. I was asking Hammond on the way up, what are all these tents out here? I mean, miles and miles of desert. And you saw these tents. He said, oh, it's that time of year. During the winter, the Kuwaitis, they go and set up tents, even though they live in the city, in Kuwait City, they go and set up tents, and it's a way to show their children the way they used to live. It's sort of like ice fishing, I think, in Minnesota or something. Because they actually, believe it or not, have generators. You know, look here, I think that's that holds water. They have generators. I hear they have big screen TVs in there, and they live pretty well. But they actually, during the winter months, they all camp out on the weekends typically. You know, they work during the week.
What's the temperature there?
What?
What's the temperature there?
Well, it was, when I was there, it wasn't hot. It was just late November, and it's chilly. Dubai was warm. Dubai was in the 90s, but it's further south. It was probably in the 50s. Most days. So. Now we finally got to the farm, and this is Hammond's farm. I'll tell you a little bit more about it here in a second. It's actually owned by his father. It's a working farm, and they have sheep and goats, and I don't know what other livestock they have. Oh, those pigeons. Those are pigeons that they imported from France. But this is the important part of the farm. And the deal that Hammond worked out with his dad, they actually own 50 acres. And they have this is a small house. The big house is for the family. And I'll show you that in a second. But his dad said, Hammond, I'll let you build I would call this a ham lodge or maybe a man cave. I don't know what you want to call it. This is unbelievable what he has. But he said, if you'll manage the farm and take care of the farm for the rest of the family, I'll let you put your antennas up out there. Now, Hammond is actually in the insurance business. He's a financial analyst. He's a city guy. But he has his farm out there, and this is what he's done to build his antennas. Just to give you an overview. Right there, this on one tower, he has 2 phased arrays of 5 elements over 5 elements for 10, and 5 over 5 on 15. Now the way he does it, the bottom ones are just pointed towards Europe, fixed. And then the upper ones you can actually turn and if you need to. But when he's fixed, all of his beams are optimized for Europe. And that's to do well in these contests, and we'll show you why. Okay? Then he has 5 over 5 on 20. Same idea. This guy is fixed on Europe, and this one rotates. Then he has a full-size 4 element like Mike's. Here's 4 element? Yeah. I don't know what brand it was, but I'm not sure. And then on top of that, you can barely see way up there he has a 6 element or a 5 element 6 meter Yagi. And we did make one contest. We just had the 6 meter radio on. One day we heard VooDoo GSM from India calling CQ. So we did work him. Not in the contest, but just before the contest. Then he has an 80 meter 4 square array. These are full size 80 meter vertical, 67 feet high. They're phased, little phasing box right there. And it's a DX Engineering phasing system. And then, by the way, this is the family house over here. We had dinner there, Thanksgiving dinner there one night. I'll show you some other pictures. 16 bedrooms, believe it or not. And the culture of the Kuwaitis is different. They're really big on family. And of course, we couldn't meet the wives. We asked to, and he said, oh, no. The wives, it's very private. They got to be in their burqas, so they're out in public. But when the family gets together, he has like 4 other brothers, so there's 5 brothers and their families. They all come, and they all stay together in this big house. It has 16 bedrooms. It's unbelievable. Now, this is back in the smaller ham radio lodge, and we were really roughing it. for a week. He had a fully stocked kitchen, 2 refrigerators, and we just had all sorts of food. Ham had provided for us. They had a living area where you could kind of sleep. It was a big room that, kind of like the size of this room, but it had sofas that went completely around the room against the wall, sort of like if you were sitting in a tent, you know, back in the olden days. And so you could go in there and rest if you wanted to. That's Don, G3XTT from England, one of the VooDoo team members. And then he had 3 bedrooms, and each bedroom could sleep 4. So he could sleep up to 12 in his radio lodge. Unbelievable setup for contest. Okay, what did we do to get ready for the contest? Well, see, I arrived on a Monday night, and the contest started on actually Saturday at 0000 GMT. So, but it was we were 3 hours ahead, so we were going to start at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning. So we had, what did we do all that week? I had no idea what I was getting myself into. This is like a giant field day, talking about field day. Because what we did was put up antennas all week, despite what they already had. I'll show you what they did. What we did was put up beverages. And they had already, when I got there, they had already had these 2 beverages up. And these were phased beverages fixed on Europe and North America. 750 feet long. And let me show you this. Does anybody know what a beverage is? Typically, it's a great receiving antenna because it lowers the noise. And all it is a wire that's strung for like 750 feet, maybe up about 7-8 feet, somewhere in there. You run some coax, I think 75 ohm coax right here to a little, there might have been a valve in there or something.
Transformer.
What? Transformer? Yeah. And then on the other end, it's terminated with a resistor to ground. Very simple. Just the other end of the wire, you just solder in a resistor and tie that resistor to a ground rod. But what that does, it provides unbelievable directivity and low noise for receiving on the low bands. And they phased 2 of them together. We'll show you how well that worked here in a second. When I got there, what I did was on Tuesday was I helped them, Mike, KC7V from Arizona. We actually put this beverage up, and it actually went further. It went about to the end of, I remember I was right on the side of of the big family lodge. And then we put another beverage up, 750 feet long, pointed towards VK, ZL. So we had one towards Japan and one towards Oceania. And then we just ran 75 ohm coax into the shack, and then they had little phasing boxes or something, preamps. Yeah, to amplify the signals. And now this gives you an idea of the property. They own about 50 acres. And of course, that's the main house. That's Hammett's radio lodge. And they're growing things. They have the livestock in here, and they're trying to grow some dates. They have irrigation in there now. They have some date trees back here, that sort of thing. Then we installed 2 160-meter verticals and phased them. I kind of got into the second half of that. They had one up the day before I got there, but they brought these designs because they knew that Hammett did not have a good 160-meter antenna. He just had an inverted V, I think. So they wanted to not only put in the phased beverages, but they also wanted to put in the verticals. And this is what they look like. They're like 30 feet high, made of aluminum tubing. Then there was a wire that went up to the top of this tower, and the other one is over here, same idea, and a wire that goes up to the top. They actually come together. So they're not perfectly phased, but Ned, the leader, AA7A, very good at phasing these things. He's an electrical engineer for General Dynamics, and this is really his thing. And so what he did, he built the phasing boxes. And of course, these had elevated radials, just 4 elevated radials each. Because one day it rained. So we were out there working in the rain. And there's his phasing box for one of them, and then how we did that. So we had phased verticals. These we used for transmitting. The beverages that I showed you, we used for receive only. Okay? Then, the other thing we did in those 4 days was, this is Hammett's station the way it looked when we got there. He had a multi-tube setup. Now what we mean by multi-tube, that means multiple transmitter, but only 2. And that's the way he normally operates. But we wanted to have 6 stations on the air. We wanted to be multi-transmitter, multi-operator. Okay? So we added 4 more positions. All this equipment came from Hammett's friends. And we had everything from, well, I'll show you the equipment list right here. But, all Yaesu transceivers. Then we had 6 different amps. That OM was a beast. We used that on 160. We ran it up 1,500 watts, but it was just loafing. And then we had these 3 new SP Expert 2Ks, which were just dynamite, quiet. We were running them at full power, 1.5, and they didn't, you couldn't even hear the fans the whole time. Really nice amps. And then we had 2 regular ACOM, just I think 3500Z or something amps for 10 and 15. But we also had to do all the hookups, rotor controls, computers, phasing boxes. We had to put in bandpass filters for every position. And then on Thursday, the Brits came in, the British guys, and they set up all the computers, and we were running, I guess it was right log. So we had it pretty much all done. So it's Thursday night. We still have another night to go, and Hammond invited a number of his ham radio friends. We had a big, what we call a Thanksgiving dinner. It wasn't really Thanksgiving event. But he went all out. We met over at the big family house, and he fixed us an entire lamb, and it was cooked in rice for 5 hours, and that just produced a great evening, wonderful food. You can see they would put a red sauce on everything. It was a kind of a spicy red sauce, but unbelievably good. And there's a lot of Hammett's friends. I'll introduce you to them here in a second. A lot of the VooDoo guys down the other side of the table. There's Bud. We had some fun because he was giving Hammond a hard time about the way he had his station set up. So they gave Bud the head of the lamb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bud's your buddy, right?
But yeah, he's the friend. He's the one that really got.
He's eaten lunch with us before.
Yeah, he's eating lunch here in Paducah. You're right. And then we gave a little plaque, just, in appreciation of what Hammond was doing in hosting us. That's actually a key out of K5VT's collection, who was one of the founders of the VooDoos. If you remember, he went all around the world in the 80s and 90s. He was always on different expeditions, but he's assigned a key now. That's a strategy session. This is the living room of the big house. Not only do we have these big dining rooms, but there were actually 2 living rooms. They're connected together, but this was just one side. They had these big Persian rugs, and on the other side they had the same thing. I don't know how many people could see, but you could tell when they had the whole family there, they had to have room for everybody. Then on Friday we had or a couple of days of catered lunches, and Hammond just paid a guy, caterers to come out and fix us lunch, and they had gyros. It was sort of like eating at Mike's, Arab style, and they were the best. Let me tell you, they were just fantastic. The food was wonderful the whole time we were there. So this is what we call our support team. these four guys were primarily sideband ops. They weren't really CW ops. Hammond, though, is a great CW operator. And so he was part of our team. But these guys were there the whole contest. They're helping us. They're serving food, helping us kind of with equipment or whatever we needed. They just did a great job. They would show up some days with their robes on if they were going to work. And these robes were pressed just perfectly. So I asked them, I said, well,
You need always cleaners?
yeah, really. Yeah, that would be great. Because they just really were pressed. But they said that to go to work, they either had to wear a Western suit or their robe with the headdress. But then if they're off duty, and I saw this all over Dubai and Kuwait, if they're off duty, you would see a mixture. Some people would dress with the robes, more traditional, and others would dress just like Americans. They look like they walked out of Gap or something, wearing Nikes. There's our team. And this is we actually were short one because Fred, A65BD, couldn't make it. So we had a 9-man team. And you can see there were like 5 of us from the U.S. maybe. Yeah, 4 from Britain, something like that, plus Hammond thrown in. I guess 3 British guys. There's normally more from Britain, but a couple of those guys couldn't make it this year as well. So, on Friday night, as the sun was setting, we were ready. And so we actually had to kind of go to bed. And I was on the first shift at 3 a.m. Of course, by then I didn't know what time it was. I'm on that side of the world. I've been up and, you really didn't know. But I went and got a little sleep. And then there were 6 of us, well, really, I don't think we had 10 meters going at 3 a.m. But we had 4 or 5 operators ready to go. And the contest officially started at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning. Our goal was to break the all-time Asian multi record, multi-operator, multi-transmitter record. That was set by a team from Abu Dhabi, A621AJ in 1999. I think Bernie was on that, W3UR. There's quite a number of North Americans up over there. That was our goal, 38 million, almost 800,000 points. Back then, they did almost 16,000 contacts, worked that many zones. We'll talk about zones in a second, and that many countries. The way it works, the way the contest rules work, your multipliers are the number of zones you work and the number of countries you work on each band. So there's 6 bands, 160 through 10. And so it's the total of all those multipliers and zones that you work and then it's your QSOs times the points that you earn, and I'll explain that to you in a second. You get QSO points times your total zones, and that's how you come up with the 38 million. Now we knew we had the least average with 6 stations, 330 contacts per hour for 48 hours. Okay? And we had to work over 1,000 or close to 1,000 multipliers. We were a little concerned about that. Even the VooDoo guys have been doing this for years in Africa. They were not sure if we could get that many multipliers. But we were closer to Europe, so that was a big difference that we were, and Europe has a lot of multipliers, a lot of countries. Okay, this is a little snapshot of the log as it started out. And I just made a copy of that. This is me. I'm really proud of this. This is 6 minutes into the contest, and I worked VE1ZZ on 160 meters. See, he's zone 5. And we got 3 points for that because he was outside of Asia. And there's a lot of strategy that goes into this, and let me explain that to you here. We knew our first strategy going into this was we wanted to work Europe and North America. We knew West Coast was going to be tough, but we were hoping we'd have some good openings into the East Coast. We weren't going to try to work Asia at all. Now why? you would think where we were, Japan was very close and they were loud. They only count 1 point. See, the way the contest works, if you contact somebody from your same continent, you only get 1 point. If it's from another continent, you get 3. So it's very key to our strategy, and it worked. It turns out that was a very, very important strategy to focus on the 3-point contacts. And really the way we did that, if you go back here, of course this is the contest that's just starting out, but even when I was on 40 meters, let's say one night, I could turn that 4-element Yagi to Japan and start working Japanese, quite a few, one after another. The problem was, then Europe was off the side, and here I'm having to work 3 JAs for every 1 European. So what I would actually do was turn the beam towards Europe and North America, try to work as many 3-point contacts, and then you would work the Japanese, they'd be a little weaker off the side. And so only when we couldn't work anything else would we just turn the beams to Japan and just try to work Japanese one after another. Okay. But anyway, that's kind of cool. You'll see an example of the point system right here. You see how these are all 3-pointers. And then there's a 1-pointer. That's a Asiatic Russian station from Asia. See? So he only counts 1 point. So there's a couple more down here, a couple other Asiatic Russians. So our goal was to work as many 3-pointers as we could. And the other goal was to work as many zones and as many different countries as we could. And every time we worked a new one on a band, we get a red check mark. This is the way N1MM works. I actually imported the log into N1MM, for those of you that know. Anyway. The other thing that we knew we had to do was really emphasize working multipliers. That was going to be key to our score. So the software had an ability to pass a multiplier. So let's say I worked a fairly rare station, a Venezuelan station on 40 meters, and then I saw, hey, the software would tell you that we needed Venezuela on 2 or 3 other bands. So I could actually send a message to the other operators at these other positions and let them know, and I would try to pass the YV. I would say QSY, and I would tell them what frequency we were on the other bands. Didn't always work, but when it did, it was a really handy way to catch additional multipliers. Then the other thing we did, we had bells. They passed out bells. Of course, I was a rookie, so I'd never been to one of these before. But at every station, we had 6. Every time you worked a new homing, you're supposed to hit the bell. And so, or at the beginning part, bang, 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 everybody said, but at the end of the contest, when you hit a bell, that was something. And it was kind of fun, actually. Now, the other thing, I'm going to skip this and come right back. Here we are, starting the contest. And what's really amazing about a CW contest, there's no noise. I mean, we're just sitting there with headphones on and using the keyboards. And so it's very quiet. We had all 6 of those operating positions in that same room. But there was actually absolutely no noise. Of course, Hammond was our enforcer. So you could tell we were serious. Actually, we caught him one day. He was out shooting coyotes that were trying to get in the sheep. So we got a picture of him. But that's the first crop of guys, and this is the second crop group. There's me right there. I'm working 40 meters. That's Ned, our leader, AA7A. Bob is the guy that's on those stepper ads. He was in Scarborough Reef on that little platform. Remember that ad? That's Bob, W6RGG. And then, of course, there's Hammond. He was one of our operators. Let me just go back real quick. Zones. Does everybody know what zones are? Just brief explanation. CQ, who sponsors this contest, they produce the magazine. They've years ago, created a zone map where they divided the world up into 40 zones. And so in this contest, your exchange is a signal report plus the zone that you are located in. You can see all of us are located here in zone 4. And of course, in Kuwait, I was in zone 21, which is very rare. So one of the challenges in the contest is you're trying to work all 40 zones on every band and as many countries as you possibly can. That's how that works. This is a breakdown of how we actually did by hour and band. You can see at the beginning of the contest, see, I started out right here on 160, and I did pretty well. They, typically from Africa, they were lucky they made 90 contacts in 160. I think I had over 200, 250 the first 4 hours. But look how interesting this is. See, right at 0300, that was the last good hour. That'd be 7 a.m. Kuwaiti time. So the sun was starting to come up. As soon as it came up, boom, 160 was gone. See that? Same thing on 80. Look how Ned, who is really the leader and unbelievable operator, he was using that 4 square on 80 meters. And look at the rates he had. But then sure enough, right at sunrise, 80 meters dropped off the map.
I worked ahead at 0148.
0148? Okay, so that'd be right about here on that first night. Actually, you've been up there in the 80 meter segment. That's something else. That's something working Kuwait on 80 meters from here. You can see 40, it's right here. I worked a lot of 40, especially this night in here, the second night. A lot of fun, and then it kind of drops out. You know, it lasts a little bit longer. Now what's interesting, you can see at the beginning of the contest, nothing on 10 meters, it was 3 a.m. in the morning. Nothing on 15, but by this hour, which is only the 4th hour, we had all 6 stations on the air. Didn't last very long. So we were making contacts in 160, 80, 40, 20, 15, and 10. And that was our best hour. We almost had 600 in 1 hour. Then, you know, as the sun came up, the high bands took over, and look at all the rates we had on 10 meters, 15, 20. The low bands, nothing going on at all. So that was one of the problems. We couldn't keep all 6 transmitters on the air all the time. There were only brief times when we could do that. But that kind of gives you an idea. The other thing that's interesting, you know, activity kind of went down. The reason is we kept working everybody. There were just fewer to work the longer we went. But the other aspect, we were a little disappointed. The second day conditions just weren't great on 10 and 15, and it just wasn't a stellar weekend. So we could have really done well if our conditions would have held up a little better. But look how at night, when 160 comes alive, 80, 40. I was right here. I worked 40. I remember one of the days, I think this was me. I had to bring it up at 1200, which would be 3 p.m. Kuwaiti time. Of course, I had a 4-element Yagi, and I pointed it towards the east, you know, where it was dark. And so I was able to get some runs going. And then by, you know, 6 o'clock or 7, 40 opens up wide, you know, we point the beams to Europe, and we're going full steam ahead. Kind of gives you an idea of the way the contest works out. That's how we did QSOs by band. We're real proud of the fact you can see kind of relatively, definitely 20 was the workhorse. 10 and 15 were very close, very similar. 40 was a great band, but with a 4-element Yagi, unbelievable. And look what we did on 80 with a 4 square. And even on 160, we almost had 1,000 contacts. And that was with those phased verticals for transmitting and the beverages for receiving. Those phased beverages that we put in, they actually had some sort of a splitter so that the 160 and the 80 meter positions could listen on those beverages at the same time. I don't know how, I think there was a little bit of signal loss, but like 3 dB or something, but it sure didn't seem to bother anybody. This is a summary of what we did. Now, as soon as the contest was over, you know, by the next day, we uploaded our results, and we were pretty confident we had 40 million points. We thought maybe we had beaten the record. But then we started thinking about, in these contests, they check your logs. They have these big computer systems, and they go through and they check, and if you've copied somebody's call incorrectly or put in the wrong zone for them, counts off. Not only does the contact not count, you get penalized another point or two. So we started thinking about it. We said, we realized if we're going to beat the all-time record, our score reduction rate had to be less than 3.2%. So we were I was a little bit unsure. I wasn't quite sure how good all these operators were and how accurate they were, even myself, you know. So we submitted our score, and they checked all the logs. The preliminary results are out. We did it. We just barely beat the all-time record. Now, it's not official yet. The official results are not out, but the preliminary results are out, and it shows that our final score after log checking is 38,853,000. What's really interesting, we made over 15,000 contacts, and we only lost 150. So we had a 1% error rate. I think that's pretty darn good.
What you doing, Dukes, Dave?
You leave dupes in the log. They don't count off for them.
I was gonna say, cause for some reason, I got excited. I worked with you guys twice on 80 and.
That's Rule 9.
Rule 9 again.
I broke Rule 9 big time. And I worked 40 meters, two times on 40, but I've worked common before on sideband, 40 and 30 and 17 point.
If any of you guys know Ed at all, he believes in 2 or 3 insurance contacts for every country.
Hey,
He doesn't take any
don't think
risks.
you don't do it too.
Well, we appreciate it, but the way they years ago with these computer systems, they don't worry about dupes, and let me tell you, that's actually very valuable. Here's why. When we first got these results back, we were slightly below the all-time record. So we had a chance to look at what they said our errors were, and they had counted off an HK Columbia station, which was a multiplier for us like on 80 meters. And we needed that one multiplier to beat them. And so we looked, we had a dupe in there. We had worked them again. See? And we were in the log. So probably what happened was we thought we worked them one time, or he did, or he got our call wrong, so we didn't match. But then we worked, so we weren't in the log, so he works this again. We match up again, and they gave us credit. So we pointed that out.
You know, that's how it happens, you know, you get these contests and pileups and stuff, and all of a sudden you're sitting there, you're hearing an AB4, and next thing you know, you hear nothing.
Yeah.
So
it's really, but it's really important getting these calls correct. Now, here's how we did. When you compare us to A61AJ, it's really interesting. Our strategy worked in that, if you look here, they beat us. They had 600 more contacts than we did. They had 10 more countries, zones, and about 51 more countries. So in theory, you'd think they would have beat us. But guess what? QSO points. Remember, it's not just the QSO, it's how many points you get depending on what continent it's on. We end up working more 3-pointers, okay, than they did. So our total QSO points was higher. And that's what made the difference. We just barely beat them by 63,000 points. We thought we were going to do a lot better than that. The first day was just unbelievable, but the second day, those conditions went down, and we just had a little trouble keeping the rate up. This kind of gives you an example of, this confirms our strategy of working the Europeans. This shows you right here, these are the zones, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, there's 20. These are all European contacts. This is North America. These are all 3-pointers. Look how many we had. We had like 14,000 3-pointers and maybe 1,000 1-point contacts. Now, I looked at their log, and it looks to me like they had, this is Japan right here, the 1-pointers. They probably had more like about 3,000 Japanese contacts. And so it's amazing how that strategy can make a difference. But again, when we had a choice, we'd rather have the beam facing Europe and work those 3-pointers, and we'd work the Japanese off the side, and we just wouldn't work as many. We weren't working the little JA guys that were weak because we couldn't hear them very well. But also, I think what made the difference was our score reduction was very low. Altogether, they checked 7,600 logs. That's how many entered the contest. And they all do this by computer. And the median for score reduction was 8.27. We were at 3. And the median for errors, just QSOs that are wrong in the log, before penalties and all that, was 2.56, where we're at 1.0. So that's just a summary of where we were, what we did. You can see, I think, the whole strategy and how the team approached it really made a difference. Now, believe it or not, we came in 3rd in the world in multi-multi. We didn't win the whole contest. A team from Morocco had like 78 million points.
CN2R?
Yeah, CN2R, I think. The reason is they were close to North America and Europe. And our openings to North America were surprisingly kind of narrow. They were like 2 or 3 hours. We were hoping they would be open, much longer than that. But see, in Morocco, they're just sitting there working us all day long, North America. And so they're just racking up those 3-point contacts. And then there was an HK, Columbia station, that also has North America real close, and then Europe fairly close. And they beat us, they had like 45 minutes. So we came in 3rd in the world, but 1st in Asia, and we set the all-time Asian record for the multi-multi category. So the next day we left Kuwait. That kind of gives you an idea. It's a very modern, cities are modern. That's an example of the dress. These guys are always dressed very formally out in public, and it's very impressive to see. The ladies, you saw everything. From this is the most conservative, the black burqas, whatever you call them, with just the little slits. But in the airports, you would see them. Then you'd see ladies in really fine, lighter colored robes, and then they would have just a half of a scarf, or they would just have a scarf just tied around their head, exposing their entire head. And oftentimes you'd see these Rolex watches, nice shoes. What I heard is what these ladies actually do, they just throw this on over what would be Western clothes from our standards when they're out in public. But as soon as they go into a more private area with all women, or they get to the Western world, they rip off these burqas, and they look like us. The kids, and I'll show you that here in a second, just a really impressive, rich, modern culture. Very impressed with it. Of course, it's ancient. And the people are friendly. This guy just walked up to us, and that's his son. And that's the way a lot of the kids run around. They look just like our two, representing the same generation, And but the people are very friendly, especially in Kuwait and Dubai. They love Americans. And then you see this blooming skyline everywhere. These are from Dubai, but the same thing in Kuwait. Unbelievable skyline. So just on the way home, I decided to take the long way, and just very briefly, instead of flying, back to London and Chicago, I decided to go around the world. But I had a deal where on Royal Jordanian, if I flew to Jordan and had a little layover, and then I could fly to Bangkok, and it was a really good deal. And then what I did was stay a night in Bangkok, then 2 nights in Hong Kong, and then I flew all the way back across the Pacific to Dallas. That was like
Malaysian Airlines?
What?
Malaysian Airlines?
Well, I'm a little worried about that. This is Jordan. This is the Jordan Airport. There's Bangkok. Really impressive. Hong Kong. This is my hotel room in Hong Kong, overlooking the harbor. And
Kowloon or
what?
to stay in Kowloon?
No, I was actually on Hong Kong Island. Hong Kong Island. That's a view of Hong Kong from Victoria Peak, which is one of the highest points in Hong Kong. And there's Hong Kong at night. So, altogether, my trip around the world covered 7 countries, 3 continents, and 22,000 miles. And really produced a lot of great memories. Next up, Aruba. And that's all I have.
Did you end up leaving all the antennas that you erected around it?
Yes, he really wanted those beverages. He didn't want, of course, there was no reason to take it back. And that was part of a way that we could pay him back for hosting us. So he wanted those beverages. Now, he may eventually take them down. I don't know if they're going to get in the way of their farming or whatever, but they really work. The other thing is, instead of those temporary verticals for 160 that we put up, he wants to put up more, probably a couple of full-size 160-meter verticals and phase them. So he's going to make some improvements. It'll be interesting whether he invites us back or not. We didn't discuss them, so I have no idea.
Did you send crates of material for the antennas in advance?
No. Really, all the thing, we just brought some phasing boxes, he pretty much provided a lot of, the wire, coax. What Ned, who is AA7A, this real guru on phasing, he brought a lot of the basic things, the toroid coils and capacitors and a few of these DX engineering phasing boxes. We didn't bring a lot of equipment. We all brought keyers and headphones. That was about it. That was the best thing about this trip, is the Kuwaitis provided virtually all the equipment. Yes.
Do you remember very much about how that Oceana beverage antenna worked? Because you weren't trying to make contacts with Australia, but the long haul might have gone through California, so maybe you could hear them, but is it likely that they couldn't hear you?
Good question. I didn't use that beverage very much. I tended to operate more 160 and 40. I think they used that beverage a little bit more on 80. So I just never really used that one that much. We did try to work long path into the West Coast. And I did that. I turned the 4-element 40-meter Yagi, long path towards the U.S., right at their, I guess it would be their sunrise and our sunset. And I could run a few, like 10, 15, 20, but I couldn't, I couldn't get a real, part of it was just so much QRM from the contest. I couldn't pull the weaker signals out as well. But it was fun trying to work the West Coast. It was just hard to do.
So what kind of Yaesu radio do you work on?
Well, I really worked on all of them, because, the FT2000s and the 5000. We thought the 5000 had a better receiver, like we already know, I guess. But we liked the ergonomics of the 2000 a little better. But it was just personal preference.
That beverage you used wanted toward Oceana, wouldn't that have maybe got you more results for it than toward South America?
No, because that's a long path. That's a long path direction. You're better off South America working them short path most of the time, kind of like North America.
I mean, instead of pointing it toward Oceana, towards South America.
Yeah. I mean, you're thinking, that's kind of what you have to think about when you're putting these antennas on. Yeah.
The gray line, characteristics of that. Did you notice that? When you get the
Oh,
gray
yeah.
line on the map, your maximum signals were the beginning and the end.
Yes, and definitely the gray line plays an effect on, especially the low bands. That's again, when we would try to work long path into North America, or, you know, I'm trying to think, our sunrise, would always be to the west. So we did try to use it a little bit. But I have to admit, you know, if the rates were running and, you know, to rack up those 3-pointers, we were trying to work as many, you know, Europeans as we could. But we had to balance that because we had to work multipliers. So you had to go out and get those multipliers all over the world too. It was a challenge.
Are you limited to one transmitter per band?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why you couldn't split and just put somebody on your band,
Yeah.
just hammer.
And run multipliers or something like that, yeah. You know, in theory, we could have had a multiplier, what they call a multiplier station, and he just sits there and looks at the computer, and sometimes you might have a tri-bander for that, and he just looks for any multipliers, and then you can only have one transmitted signal at a time, I believe. Or can you have?
Per band,
Per band,
I
yeah.
think, yeah.
So you have to sequence it, but there are some stations like this that will run a multiplier station just to chase any new countries that pop up or that sort of thing. See, part of the reason is the main op might be having a big run, so he doesn't really want to stop and go get that multiplier at certain times. So it's nice to have somebody else that can go do that. It's getting late, but any other questions? Yeah.
What were the 4 160 verticals made of? Were they rolling towers or?
Well, no, 80-meter vertical.
80.
Oh, 80.
That was an 80-meter four-square. They were heavy-duty aluminum. Yeah, he had actually tried to make 160. I think he had them specially machined. These are aircraft T6 or I don't know, but he was talking. He had tried to make 160-meter verticals out of the same tubing, but they buckled over on him. He couldn't figure out a way to get them up. You know, because it'd be like 130 feet high. So he's probably gonna have to put up a tower of some sort, like a Ron 25G or something, if he wants that tall of a tower for 160. Very good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Don't run away, I've got some information here about shirts.
Hello, it's Paul Smith.
Okay, hang in here for a
Hello,
minute.
it's Paul Smith.
As you can see, here's an example of a shirt.